I'm Patrick Donegan with HardenStance. Welcome to another Trust Talks with Enea Adaptive Mobile Security. This time, I'm joined by John Hughes. John is newly appointed as Senior Vice President and Head of Enea Adaptive Mobile Security, and Martin Gallagher. Martin is a Signaling Threat Analyst with the company's Threat Intelligence Unit, the TIU. John, good to see you. How are you?
Patrick, very good. Thanks. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. And Martin, how are you doing?
Good, Patrick. Good to finally meet you. Thanks.
Likewise. So, as usual, we're going to start off with an update on Enea Adaptive Mobile Security, the company itself. We're then going to go on to hear about the latest and greatest in malicious signaling and signaling firewall requirements. And we'll finish off, as we usually do, with a brief look at some interesting news items that have surfaced over the course of the last couple of months. So to our first segment, the company news. Good to see you, John. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Yeah, I joined AdaptiveMobile back in 2006, just after it was founded, and since then I've worked in many positions across Adaptive, from R&D to product to service delivery and support, and most recently as Chief Operating Officer. So I think the breadth of my experience and knowledge of our customers' needs and the market space has served me well to date, and hopefully will serve me well into the future. And given our recent, just over 12 months ago, our acquisition and joining of Enea, I think the growing importance of security in telecoms is a great place to be in, and it's something I'm very proud to lead Enea Adaptive Mobile Security forward in, and it's something I'm also very excited about.
And by good fortune, it seems like for your first Trust Talks in your new role, you're in a position to tell us about a pretty chunky new contract.
Yeah, we have great news to announce. Some people may have seen in the media that we announced a large deal with a North American CPaaS provider, that's communication platform as a service provider. It's a deal in the A2P SMS market space, space which is growing exponentially, has been, and by all accounts will continue to. We're seeing analysts reporting that it should grow in the next 3 years by over 11 billion, which is an indicator of the importance of this particular sector. And I think it's also an indicator of how important security is in this sector, and how important AdaptiveMobile is in providing that security capability to these customers, that existing customers of ours would place this continued trust in AdaptiveMobile to continue performing and delivering these services to them into the future.
Great stuff, and I gather you are you have been and are going to be busy with events and promotions in recent weeks and in the run-up to Christmas.
Yeah, that's right, Patrick. It's a busy period. Simeon Coney, our Chief Strategy Officer, recently attended a MEF Wholesale Connects event on the top 5 A2P messaging threats impacting brand reputation and profitability. That was an online event. There's a new blog on our website that I'd point people to. It's worth a read. We also have attended the WAS event in Cape Town, where it was great to meet our customers in person and talk about insights on the relevance of SMS in 5G. Cathal McDade, our CTO, presented at Virus Bulletin in Prague, right, in relation to some recent publications he's worked on for us and issued. I'd point people to those. It's in relation to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It really is a super read. It gives an insight into the sophistication of these state-backed threat actors and the dangers that they pose to telecoms networks in general, and society as a whole. And I think these events, as tragic as they are, they really are exposing what these state-backed actors do on a regular basis to all of us. Looking forward, then, we're preparing to attend the AfricaCom event in Cape Town from the 8th to the 10th of November. Anyone who's interested, please go to our website and they can make a booking to speak with our security experts there. And we'll be attending the upcoming MEF event in London from the 29th to the 1st of December. And Simeon Coney again will be talking about A2P messaging threats and A2P regulations.
Great stuff. And to cap it all off, I gather you've been shortlisted for an industry award, a gong no less.
That's right, Patrick. Yes, we're delighted to receive this recognition for the groundbreaking nature of our world's first unified 5G network security solution and the critical role that security will play in the success of the 5G standalone rollout. The Total Telecom World Communication Awards are a very prestigious award, and we're very proud to be selected from such an impressive and prestigious field of security industry leaders.
Great stuff. So on now to our core theme for this Trust Talks, which is malicious SS7 signaling and signaling firewall requirements. Obviously, that's core to Enea AdaptiveMobile Security's business, no surprises there. But this audience, you folks haven't heard from the threat intelligence part of the company before, so we rather thought you might like to on this occasion. Martin, a very warm welcome to you. What does a typical day in the working life of a signaling threat intelligence analyst look like?
Well, Patrick, as you know, Enea AdaptiveMobile are a telco security solutions provider, and for the last 6 or 7 years, AdaptiveMobile Security have been developing and deploying signaling firewalls, first SS7, then diameter, and more recently GTP firewalls at multiple networks across the globe. TIU have 2 main areas of focus: messaging and spam controls, and also signaling. And I'm a member of the signaling team.
Okay.
So the TIU signaling team offers an ongoing managed service to help operators interpret firewall violations and attacks encountered within their network. We also help evolve the protection rules over time. And maybe the duties of a TIU analyst can be kind of distilled down to 3 or a few key functions. First, we have to actually tune the firewall in any new network so that unauthorized and sometimes dangerous signaling is eliminated, while also not interfering with the legitimate signaling. Networks, of course, are extremely reluctant to interfere with anything that isn't broken. So it's always difficult engagement initially. In addition to that, we perform ongoing threat intelligence analysis to our clients who have opted to avail of a signaling service. Obviously, communicate the findings with the client and our internal teams, ensuring that we all remain up to date with the most recent developments. So, like a typical day will really involve us performing a series of security checks at the firewalls across our customers. As you might imagine, again, there are countless violation patterns observed within the global signaling network. So it's our task to triage these and identify notable attacks. Perhaps you might kind of imagine these as being the needles in the haystack, or equally important, perhaps identify aspects of configuration which might require adjusting. Time is always in limited supply, because the detailed forensic logs are not maintained indefinitely. So it's important that we identify all of these serious incidents as quickly as possible, bring them to the attention of our customers so that we have the best chance to perform a kind of comprehensive and meaningful investigation into those incidents.
And what are the sort of typical, the most common attacks that you're seeing these days?
Well, the things vary considerably. First of all, attack frequency, or the cadence of attacks, varies significantly from network and from region. In fact, even within a country, we see, network A and B might have, adequate or robust protection mechanisms where the attack levels might be low, whereas network C in the same country might actually suffer a much higher rate of attacks. The most common types of attacks are always information retrieval, followed by location tracking. The reality is, to perform many of the more complicated attacks in signaling, or the more complicated signaling attack sequences, it's necessary first to obtain an INSI. So an INSI, you can consider this to be like the private identifier, the private key of the subscriber in the network.
Yeah.
If the INSI can be protected, meaning it's never disclosed to an attacker, then many of those attacks are simply not possible or viable. But because of the need to therefore retrieve an INSI, we see fairly common and discrete attempts to probe networks for weaknesses. I think you could think of this maybe as network fuzzing, but performed at a very discrete frequency so that it doesn't raise suspicion or alarm.
Right.
So that's always the first objective for attackers, to try and obtain these private identifiers. Next, location tracking would be the most common thing that's attempted. Globally, mobile networks, of course, are made up of base stations, and the latitude and longitude of these base stations is pretty freely available on various online databases. So it's easy to confirm the location of a subscriber if the cell identifier can be retrieved from the network. So irrespective of what device you have, whether it's a smartphone or a dumb phone or whatever, or a legacy device, or however careful you might be, if you possess a mobile device, there's not much you can do to prevent your location from being disclosed if your network is not fully secured. I mean, in addition to that, we see other attack scenarios, but they're typically rarer. There are markets, for example, where interception attacks are quite common. For instance, the interception of social media two-factor authentication codes are quite common. You can imagine what sort of damage somebody might do if those are disclosed. We also see attempts to redirect or intercept banking transaction codes, or even the redirection of phone calls for eavesdropping purposes. So it can be quite serious. Fraud also covers a wide kind of range of scenarios. For instance, in one type of kind of simple fraud might simply be SMS home routing bypass, which can result in revenue loss for a network. And that is relatively commonly attempted and observed. Other fraud scenarios, such as the exploitation of mobile money services, tend to be less common, but again, they might have higher degrees of frequency in some riskier markets. It's kind of worth mentioning that SS7 as well remains a more actively researched attack bearer than the newer interfaces such as Diameter and GTP. SS7 has been around for quite a long time. I doubt many people in telcos would have expected it to carry communications in 2022 if you asked them 20 or 30 years ago. It's a bit like SMS. People have been prophesizing its death for a long time now.
So what's the reason why SS7 is kind of disproportionately exploited? Is it just because it's older? Is it because it's more widely deployed? Why so much more SS7 than Diameter, for example?
There's multiple reasons for that, most likely. Some networks actually don't have Diameter interconnection set up. That's just a reality for some networks. In others, SS7 simply offers an attacker more scope or more freedom in terms of the commands that are exchanged between the networks. So not just the command types that are exchanged, but the way in which you construct those commands. We sometimes refer to them as PDUs, protocol data units, but the commands in SS7 can be modified in many more ways. You have more layers in which you can construct a PDU in some unusual manner, which results in unexpected handling at a core network function. I mean, that's kind of the essence of a zero-day. So you have groups out there who are, attempting different packet types, and over the course of time, some of these unusually structured packets yield results or they yield successes for those attack groups. If we compare that to the Diameter interface, the S6 interface, it really doesn't expose as many network administration commands as SS7 does. There's simply fewer things that can be achieved via the Diameter S6 interface compared with SS7. Now, some attacks have migrated to diameter. We see attacks originated from or proclaiming or purporting to come from some networks, but they're in fact spoofed from other origin points. But in general, though, SS7 remains the preferred bearer of choice for these signaling threat actors.
And in terms of the whole area of 0 days, the PDUs, as you refer to them, in enterprise security land, they're reporting more of them, and in some ways, folks view that as a good sign, in the sense that the more easily exploitable exploits are actually folks are actually finding those. Folks are better defended against those more exploitable ones, as a result of which the number of 0 days is actually going up. What's the sort of pattern you see with 0 day equivalents in the PDUs in signaling land?
Well, I mean, as I said in the previous point, we see efforts to uncover, these. Sometimes, I guess you can consider them like signaling 0 days. We sometimes use the term like an evasive technique or a bypass technique. These problematic PDUs or evasive techniques, they emerge at random intervals. Some are effective against particular vendors' equipments. Some are effective against policies that might be implemented on a traffic routing node, such as an STP. Basically, despite being around for so long, SS7 still has multiple surprises up its sleeve. Now, in terms of dealing with these problematic PDUs, we discovered several years ago that we needed a flexible firewall in order to combat these unusual PDU structures that emerge. As you can imagine, getting changes into a core network can be difficult. There's often a validation or lab validation process that needs to be undertaken, and even just getting maintenance windows approved or scheduled can be difficult. So it's not really viable to have to wait for a patch in order to combat these new evasive techniques that emerge. So what we have developed, what we have now, is a system within our firewall, which is built, or which at its core has a very flexible rules-based engine, where all the protocol and layer decoding and even the firewall rules logic themselves are written in a kind of pseudo language. All can be modified and tweaked via the front end. And this is all very dynamic, and it eliminates the need for software updates in the network in most situations.
Right. So you flagged up to me a few days ago some new research by the Royal Military Academy in Belgium. A little beyond my pay grade in terms of being able to understand what was there, I'll be honest with you. But they've obviously, from your perspective, said some interesting things about how to go about detecting advanced SS7 attacks. To what extent did you relate and understand and agree with what is in that paper? And are there any echoes of their recommendations in your own portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, the paper is interesting, provides a good introduction to the challenges of signaling protection. I'm sure if anybody should be easily found on the internet for those who are interested. There's a few aspects to it which struck a chord. One of the attack scenarios flagged in the report related to the problem posed by IMSI catchers. We've actually encountered and blocked signaling that we associated with the operation of IMSI catchers on multiple occasions. So in some cases, an IMSI catcher would need some mechanism to correlate one of several IMSIs that might be captured over an error interface. If you imagine you're operating an IMSI catcher, you're likely to gather information on whatever IMSIs are available in the immediate area. You need a way to associate that IMSI with the MISDN, which is a much more easily it's much more easier to associate a MISDN with a target than an IMSI. But what signaling offers is a mechanism to correlate the IMSI with the MISD in detail, therefore allowing the operator of an IMSI catcher to focus their attack on that particular subscriber, that particular target. So SS7 signaling, again, it's used to correlate the details via commands that are exchanged with the home network HLR. And we've witnessed and blocked a number of incidents where we associate IMSI catcher activity, or we've blocked, attacks that we have associated with IMSI catcher activity, sometimes operating in interesting locations and interesting conferences. Within the industry, we use the term category 3. It's a GSMA term. Mm-hmm. It's used to describe a type of protection where we perform some type of location check or location plausibility check on signaling packets that might be received from a visited network. So like a mobile network, all mobile networks must be set up. They must receive roaming signaling commands from any network or any country in the world. You obviously don't need to telegraph or explain to your home network that you're planning to go to Spain or you're planning to go to, on holidays. So therefore, the network must accept and process what we call update location signaling from any location. The problem is how to handle fraudulent update location signaling. The paper offers suggestions for the paper offers some suggestions for detecting some anomalous details, for instance, checking for invalid PDU structures, whether the packet arrives from a roaming partner or not, although that isn't always a guaranteed kind of indicator of something that's suspicious or not. But perhaps the most important defense mechanism is what we again call trajectory plausibility. In other words, how plausible is it for a subscriber to transition from location A to location B in a given time frame? It might seem like a straightforward enough problem to solve. However, the world of SS7 signaling is riddled with unusual edge cases or virtualized network functions or extended networks, even satellite services. So each of these unusual services needs to be carefully analyzed, needs to be kind of categorized and exempted around so that the movements in and out of those unusual services don't or aren't considered anomalous. So with the tens of millions or hundreds of millions or even billions of roaming signals that are received back to some of the networks around the world, it's crucial to get the trip rate, or it's especially important to get the false positive rate as low as possible, because if you get it wrong, you end up breaking roaming services for a very large percentage of outbound roamers, and that obviously isn't something that any network would tolerate.
Right. And John mentioned it earlier, obviously the situation in Ukraine. I have to compliment you guys in terms of the coverage and the sharing that you've done in terms of your the intelligence you've been getting out of that environment, and the efforts of the mobile operators in Ukraine to provide part of an integrated national defensive effort. You guys have been doing some phenomenal work there. What we've seen in recent months, I suppose, or weeks, months, is new Russian-built networks cropping up on the eastern occupied parts of Ukraine. What are you seeing in terms of malicious signaling coming out of those new Russian-built networks, and how's it impacting your customers?
Well, yeah, as you can imagine, Patrick, our customers are naturally very interested in any unusual or anomalous signaling patterns that are emerging from these new networks and regions. So we are monitoring the traffic from those regions quite closely. At this point, I don't think we would say too much more beyond it. Now, in our most recent blog, written by our CTO, Carl McDade, a few interesting findings were revealed regarding the networks that are operating in the occupied territories. For those unfamiliar with the situation, there are two Russia-oriented networks operated by separatists in the Donbass. Phoenix, operating mostly in Donetsk, and MCS Lugacom, operating in Luhansk. These networks, interestingly, were formed after the invasion in 2014 and were apparently built with equipment seized from LifeCell and Kyivstar, in an attempt, I guess, to control communications and eliminate the potential for interception and eavesdropping from Kiev. So in recent weeks, Phoenix has announced two significant developments. First, they announced a switch from the Ukrainian country code, or the Ukrainian number range, which was 380, and they're planning a switch to the Russian range. That would be +7 for Russia. I think their range is 949. Now, that's not something we see attempted very often, but on a serious note, it shows or reveals the growing attempts of Russification in the region. Second major development relates to their expansion from Donetsk into Zaporizhia. The second network, MCS Lugacom, also announced a switch from Ukraine to Russian number ranges. But unlike Phoenix, MCS has not appeared to expand beyond Luhansk. And now, of course, with the Ukrainian gains in around Kharkiv, that looks even more unlikely. The occupied territories, in the southern occupied territories, there's also been some interesting developments. +7 Telecom, a brand with obvious Russian ties from the outset, has popped up in Zaporizhia and in Kherson, along with Mir Telecom, the latest network to emerge in these occupied territories. Both networks are operating with Russian number ranges and Russian IMSI ranges from the outset, unlike the ones in the occupied Donbass region. So far, we've not seen any significant malicious activity from these networks at the networks where we offer protection. However, I would imagine the picture would be very different for the local Ukrainian networks who are adjacent to those.
All right, thanks, Martin. So on now to our news section, the what's going on out there section. Now, I wonder how many people on this call have heard of Tykelab, Tyke Lab, because according to a report from Lighthouse Report, maybe you should have. They reckon that Tykelab, an Italian company with links to RCS Lab, is actually Europe's very own version of NSO Group, the folks that make Pegasus-like espionage software available to target individuals around the world. Martin, what do you make of that? It was news to many of us, but was it necessarily news to you guys?
Well, it was interesting to see a report on Tykelab, Patrick. We had come to know of Tykelab through incidents investigated at some of our client networks. However, little was known about Tykelab until these recent publications. It's certainly interesting and quite alarming to see Tykelab associated with the providers of device malware, such as RCS Lab. Now, it's not uncommon to encounter entities like these, perhaps operating under the guises of lawful intercept firms, sending suspicious or malicious signaling. In many cases, these firms claim they're providing essential services to law enforcement, but obviously there are concerns over oversight of these tools and what procedures, if any, govern the missions that are approved on these systems. It's possible, as we all know, that some of these systems can end up being used for, in some cases, criminal purposes. All it takes is one user with access moonlighting on the side. I think one of the interesting, possibly overlooked details revealed in the article was how the signaling from Tykelab originated from distant networks in the South Pacific. What happens is entities like Tykelab and other lawful intercept providers enter leasing or GT leasing agreements with multiple networks from around the world. Now, some of these leasor or the kind of original owning networks will have roaming agreements with many other networks. And when networks have roaming agreements, they are much more cautious, so they're less willing to block traffic from these dangerous GTs. They assume that they're our roaming partner. They're clearly not going to send us anything risky or dangerous. Now, one good thing is that the topic of GT leasing is finally gaining proper attention across the industry and within the GSMA fraud and security group. So hopefully it's something that can be brought under control in the coming months or years.
Right. You mentioned GSMA, which is actually quite a handy segue to the next item. So when I was at Etsy Security Week in France a couple of weeks ago, they showed, or one of the speakers showed, the GSMA's CVD dashboard, an updated version, and interestingly, showed total number of submissions received now 63, time to resolution down from roughly 3 months in 2017 and 2018 to 6 weeks this year. Proof, one might argue, Martin, that the GSMA and the industry as a whole is actually doing some pretty decent work here.
Yeah, for sure. It's just good to see these statistics out there.
Yeah.
For the last several years, the GSMA have done a lot, have provided, leadership and helped the industry, helped shape pretty much all of the standards around the security, especially signaling security. So it's good to see progress being made on this front.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, buried in that slide there's a nice little reference to SimJacker, which you guys know a thing or two about.
Yeah, it's always nice to see recognition for that. It was quite a significant discovery. Perhaps one of the few CVD disclosures which centered on a real-world attack. So yeah, it's good to see that. Yeah,
I guess a lot of those others would be theoretical in principle. Yeah, great stuff. And lastly, where our news section is concerned, we're going to talk about a beta version of PGPP, which has been launched by its inventors, Paul Schmidt and Bharat Raghavan, two researchers from Princeton University and the University of Southern California. It's PGPP, nothing to do with 3GPP, stands for Pretty Good Phone Privacy, a new privacy app for mobile phones. Martin, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the article is a Vice article, I think. It certainly looks like an interesting solution, perhaps similar to what's envisaged in 5G with the SUKI identifier. So there's no doubt that having the capability to change an INSI several times a month or however often is needed will be appealing to some users. But as others have commented in that article, the issue is the IMEI is still likely to remain the same. And that provides some agencies or some folks a means to track an individual. And of course, some networks might also consider it suspicious if the IMEI and INSI pair changes quite frequently. I mean, another thing that's mentioned in the article or that's revealed is that the INSIs are obtained from different networks around the world. The article, I think, mentioned or referenced Play Poland as being one of several sources where INSIs are kind of leased or taken from. So each of these source networks will also all have their own varying degrees of protection. Perhaps the protection levels at Play Poland are quite high compared with the protection levels of some other operator. And this could result in varying levels of security that the end user is not likely to have any control over, because it's possible some of the suppliers of these SIMs are simply not as secured as others. So yeah, it's definitely something I'd like to see a little bit more of, and definitely looks like a compelling solution for anyone sufficiently interested or concerned.
Right. All right, so that's it, gentlemen, for another Trust Talks. John, thank you very much indeed for participating.
Thanks, Patrick.
Great pleasure. And Martin, thanks very much indeed for giving us the signaling analyst view of the world. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thanks.
That's it from me. Hope to see you next time.
Bye, Patrick.
Bye, Patrick.